We've got a gentleman here who he actually doesn't live a double life because he's recently become a full-time... I'll come up here with you here, sorry.
All right.
Yeah, you see us both now up here. Yeah, he's recently become a full-time tinfoil hat-wearing loony and not a sort of like half-baked one like me and most other people. He's come here, and we're very, very grateful for Carl for coming. He's recently suffered a major bereavement in his family, and he still came here to do his speech, which I'm very, very pleased with, I'm very, very pleased about, and very, very appreciative of that. Now, Carl, you may know Carl from the Truth Seeker blog. He's been writing, just like me, he runs a blog online where he types and types and types all kinds of information. He's a researcher into all kinds of things to do with, for instance, the films of Stanley Kubrick and other forms of science fiction. And he picks out all the strange, anomalous and esoteric themes in those publications. And today he's going to talk about a particular kind and a particular area of this research. And it's all about Walt Disney and everything that he's done in his organisation. Yeah. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, give a big warm AwakeCon welcome to Carl James.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. I'm just going to move this out. No, I'll stand up. Right. So some of you may not know me, but obviously I'm Carl James. My blog is The Truth Seeker's Guide, blogspot.com. And most of my research tends to be now in relation to the media, the entertainment industry, that sort of thing, because I tend to find that it is a really good way to get the people that aren't always aware of these larger subjects, the reality of the world. It's a good way to get people involved, wakened up, really, that sort of thing. So, like Ben was saying, in this talk I'm going to be speaking about Disney. It's a very convoluted subject. It tends to get cherry-picked by certain researchers, people locking on sort of the mind control aspects of it, other people locking on sort of the esoteric symbolism and the embedded sexual symbolism and that sort of thing. Other aspects of it are the military-industrial complex associations with Disney. But I think when you look at Disney, you really do have to look at the whole picture. Specifically because of the fact that I've had some contact with somebody who's worked in Disney for a number of years, quite a prominent position. I will come to that as we go on. But when you understand what's really going on behind Disney, you start to sort of get a clearer picture. It's very sinister. And there is quite a lot of sort of negative energy surrounding it all. I don't want to sort of make this to be sort of a negative energy talk, because certainly there are aspects, the ways that we can deal with this. So we'll talk about at the end how we can turn this into a much more positive thing. But really, you do sort of have to tell the story, really, first of all. So I think what we'll do is we'll just start with the man himself, Walt Disney. Before I start as well, I just want to say that I'm going to be reading an awful lot of stuff off slides. It's not exactly how some people like this to be done, but it's the nature of the way Disney is. It's so convoluted, there's so much information. And Disney, although they might not necessarily care about anything I've got to say on the subject, but Disney do not like people casting the company in a negative or derogatory way. They have actually clamped down on publications, books, articles that have been written about them. They're very much obsessed with painting this wholesome family value image of themselves, and it's just not the case. So anyway, Walt Disney, born in Chicago in 1901. At the age of 18, he worked as a commercial illustrator. He moved to Hollywood with his brother Roy and set up the Disney Brothers studio, which later became the Walt Disney Company in 1923. And their early successes were Alice in Wonderland short films. 1928, he created Mickey Mouse character pictured there with Walt. And 1937 created the first full animated feature film in sound and colour, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And then in the years that followed after that, he had things like Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo. But then all of a sudden, Disney changed its tack, come to World War II. And exclusively the case at the time with Disney, compared to all the other film studios, Disney was very much co-opted by the US Department of Defense and employed in military propaganda. By 1941, we've got the US Army and Navy Bureau of Aeronautics contracted out most of the Disney studio facilities. The staff were employed to create training films, instructional films, propaganda basically, home front morale boosting shorts such as De Furious Face and the 1943 film Victory Through Air Power. And it was the only studio, as I say, it was the only studio to be fully converted into a military post. Film equipment was replaced with anti-aircraft weaponry. The parking lots were filled with ammunition and jeeps and that sort of thing. And the Burbank studio actually guarded the nearby Lockheed plant against possible airstrikes. And during that period, 90% of production took the form of propaganda from Disney. And those techniques were so effective that the Nazis actually copied it wholesale, pretty much so. Another little point to add on to the end of it as well, because it does tie into the military-industrial complex, is this in 1941 that the US State Department sent Walt Disney and a load of his animators down to South America as well as part of its Good Neighbours propaganda policy. So they really were in the thick of propaganda at this period in time. So you could perhaps argue that, well, that's understandable, you know, during this period, Second World War, but it continued. After the war ended, it carried on. Walt Disney himself, as well as the company, very much supported the military-industrial complex. Got 1955, the creation of the Mickey Mouse show for ABC television. It was on the air for about 3 decades and spawned a number of high-profile figures, including some of these examples here: Justin Timberlake, Christina Aguilera, Britney Spears. Very innocent, wholesome there compared to how they turned out in the end, don't they? So, but they're known as the Mouseketeers. Wholesome, valued, squeaky clean, you know, that sort of thing. And the mouse reels, the cartoon, the Mickey Mouse Club, sorry, they had these huge doses of military propaganda. They had these shorts called the mouse reels, featured military storylines that were pre-approved, pre-screened by the Pentagon. And one example was January the 7th, 1956, where Disney shot aboard the world's first nuclear submarine, the USS Nautilus, pictured there. And the Nautilus's official patch, insignia patch, was actually designed by Walt Disney himself, along with a number of other military-associated projects. There's the Toys for Tots programs for the US Marine Corps as well. They designed the logo for that. Moving into the idea of the films now, film cooperation, production of films between Disney. Surprises people. These are just a few examples that I'm going to go through here, but there are many, many other examples that you can find on the internet if you go and look for yourself. These are films that are produced by Disney or were produced by some of their subsidiaries, the likes of Touchstone Pictures, Hollywood Pictures, Buena Vista. We'll start with, I think it was about 63, 64, something like that. Lieutenant Robin Crusoe, Follow Me Boys. We have The Last Flight of Noah's Ark, Ernest Saves Christmas. I'm not entirely sure why the military was involved with the production of that film. The Rocketeer, Firebirds, Camp Nowhere, In the Army Now, Renaissance Man, Flubber, that surprises quite a few people, Operation Dumbo Drop, Air Force One, The Pacifier, The Negotiator, Below, Annapolis, Real Steel, The Guardian, the film Traitor. That was actually produced by a company called Mandeville Films, which was also a subsidiary of Disney as well. So, we'll look at the Marvel franchise now, Disney owned. We have basically the whole entire franchise has been co-produced with the Department of Defense. Iron Man 1 and 2 were assisted by all branches of the military, heavily the US Air Force. Iron Man 3 received United States Marine Corps support according to the military's own ELO reports. This is how they established, they let people know basically officially what projects they've worked on with them. The Incredible Hulk had military advisors and thanked Canadian Armed Forces in the end credits of the film. Thor was advised by former Navy SEAL Harry Humphreys, who also worked on Iron Man. Captain America, the first Avenger, advised by former British Royal Marine Commando Bill E. Budd and 2 former US Marine Freddie Joe Farnsworth and Chris Gilbertson. And the film was officially supported by the British government as well, including the Ministry of Defence and the US Army. The Avengers is an interesting one because, as I say, all support across the board. Officially, Disney say that the military was not involved with the production of the Avengers, but that's not true. Because the production had official military advisors. Parts of the film were shot at the White Sands missile range, which is something that the producers would have needed military approval to do. And John Clearwater, who's the then head of the US Army's ELO, is actually thanked in the end credits of the film if you look out for it. So I think it speaks for itself, and it makes you wonder why they're not, saying that they weren't involved. So. Another example here is Jerry Bruckheimer, entered into a production deal with Disney between 1993 and 2014. His films are heavily military orientated. Away from Disney alone, we've got the Top Gun film, which I believe they're making a sequel to now actually, which is basically just a recruitment film for the US Air Force, that sort of thing. And the Transformers film franchise as well, which is heavily military orientated and supported. So let's look at some other films made by Jerry Bruckheimer and Disney, all DoD supported as well. We've got the likes of Dangerous Minds, Con Air, Enemy of the State, which was also supported by the CIA in production as well as the DoD. Armageddon, again, collaborative production there, DoD and NASA in this case. Pearl Harbor, Bad Boys 2, National Treasure, and Deja Vu, all Jerry Bruckheimer films, all DoD supported, all Disney films. Another example here, 2011, Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides. And bear in mind that this film is set in a period that doesn't have any resemblance to the military as we know it today, yet production was supported by the Marine Corps. They say that they allowed them to use a vantage point at one of their bases in Hawaii to shoot there. I think the reason why it may be coincidence, I don't know, is because one of their detachment helicopter units based there is nicknamed the Pirates of the Caribbean, so maybe it was just like a PR stunt for them. But it's still there, that corroboration. This surprises a lot of people if you don't already know about it. DoD, Disney, Bruckheimer film again, 1996, The Rock. And part of the plot of that film was actually used by Western intelligence agencies, according to the Chilcot Report, as the basis for the totally fabricated intelligence information about Saddam Hussein's so-called chemical weapons program in order to make a case for war. And that actually, for me, is quite shocking because if we think about what's happened in the years since 2003, I think it was, with the start of the Iraq War, still sort of to some degree going now, that a Disney film, albeit the DoD-supported one, was actually played a part in starting that war and perpetuating. It's shocking, really, to think that. An film that's supposed to be entertainment, Like I say, Walt Disney himself as well had pro-military establishment before, during, and after the Second World War. But what's curious about that is he's actually also sympathetic to certain Nazi doctrines as well. He was fiercely anti-Semitic, and according to the book Walt Disney, Hollywood's Dark Prince by Mark Elliott, he actually attended Nazi party meetings in America in the company of this chap called Gunther Lessing, who was a Disney attorney and chief advisor on labor issues. And that's actually been confirmed by this chap called Arthur Babbitt, who was also a former Disney employee, who also attended the meetings out of curiosity. We also got the fact that Disney was very close friends with Leni Riefenstahl, who was notorious film propaganda maker for the Nazi regime. Very influential on people like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg of filmmaking is. And also Werner von Braun, pictured there with Walt Disney, also pictured here with his cohorts. Obviously brought to America through Operation Paperclip after the Second World War, pivotal figure in the establishment of NASA, and also helped Disney to produce films like Man in Space, Man on the Moon, and Mars and Beyond. So we're talking about NASA now a little bit. I don't want to go into too much detail on this. This is a wealth of material out there. But 6 films here collaborated with the NASA, the likes of JPL, Caltech, between Disney. A Mission to Mars, it's an interesting example in itself because the part of the plot's to do with the face on Mars. And given NASA's position on the face on Mars, why they would wanted to have been involved with the production of that film is still an ongoing question for that one is. Aliens of the Deep, Rocket Man, Tron Legacy, Roving Mars, which is a documentary about the surface of Mars, and Doctor Strange, strangely. So like NASA and the DoD, Disney has also been involved with the CIA. I mentioned briefly about that before with Enemy of the State, but we've got another example here of 2003, The Recruit officially collaborated with the CIA in the production of that. We have the 2011 video game, Cars 2, the video game. Former CIA officer Lindsay Moran hired as a consultant. So why are the CIA getting involved with the production of computer games for Disney? Makes you wonder. And it does appear that Walt Disney himself was a CIA and FBI asset for that matter as well. This is actually taken from the book, The 13 Illuminati Bloodlines by Fritz Springmeier and Cisco Wheeler. He basically says that they basically say that just prior to World War II, the FBI recruited Walt Disney. His job was to spy on Hollywood or anything else that looked suspicious. Documents obtained from Freedom of Information Act, and I have actually looked at those documentations, so I can confirm that now. In spite of heavy censoring, clearly show that Walt Disney became a paid special correspondent asset of the FBI. It reported to FBI agent E.E. Conroy. In 1954, Walt was promoted to special agent in charge, which means others reported to him. So he held a substantial role in the organisation. And it's also worth noting as well, given how the FBI and the CIA were watching over the anti-communist movement, in America, that Disney was a member of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, and actually testified before the House Un-American Committee in 1947. There's a picture of him speaking there. I'll just talk a little bit now as well about this notion of secret organisations. I mean, the nature of the CIA is secretive, but we're getting a bit deeper here with now Disney. Documented member of the quasi-secret society, the mother chapter of the Order of Demolay, Kansas City, Missouri. And the cartoon character of Mickey Mouse was also made an honorary Demolay brother. And that's actually, I think it was the Kansas Star newspaper that was taken from, so we've got some documentation on that as well. So we have these fervent denials that Walt Disney was a Freemason. But actually, if you look, and there's a picture of it there, the cover stamp there, the Demolay membership of Brother Walt Disney, sponsored by the Masonic Stamp Club of New York, cancelled in Messline, Missouri on September the 11th, incidentally, 1968. And Demolay was funded by Freemasonry, still is as well. So, I mean, you don't wear that get-up if you're just going out shopping or down the pub or whatever, do you? So... On the subject of secretive organisations, we'll just touch briefly here on the Bilderberg Group as well, because that does tie into Disney, via the $19 billion buyout of Capital Cities ABC by Disney Company in 1996. It's actually the largest media merger in history at the time, and it's the second largest sum of money ever paid to a US company. And there's Des Friedman's book, Contradictions of Media Power, basically says that the deal was concluded at the 1995 meeting of the Bilderberg Group. And that's actually been confirmed by a Los Angeles Times newspaper article as well. So, but in the book it says the deal occurred, according to, I mentioned that there, the Los Angeles Times, because Disney's Michael Eisner bumped into Cap City shareholder Warren Buffett, he's an interesting chap in and of himself anyway, in the bracing noontime air of the Idaho resort. Thanks to the encounter, the deal was negotiated in complete secrecy and wrapped up more quickly than is usual for deals of that size and significance. I mean, these sorts of deals should not be going on behind closed doors. There's supposed to be public exposure on all of this, but we know this sort of thing goes on all the time, so hardly surprising. But there's another little aspect to this as well, which is worth bearing in mind. It kind of ties back into the CIA again, that sort of thing. Because prior to that merger, ABC was wholly owned by Capital Cities. There is a history dating back to the 1950s between ABC and Disney anyway. ABC were involved in the funding of Disneyland, and in exchange for that, they got some sort of deal where they could show Disney films on television on ABC. So there is a history there anyway. But I digress a little bit. Capital Cities was created in 1954. And you may recognise this chap here. William Casey, pictured next to old Ronnie Reagan. William Casey was a founder and executive of Capital Cities. He was also a tax advisor, investor, and partner in the company. And in 1957, he brought 51,000 shares in the company, a cost of 13 cents per share. By 1981, he had a $4.7 million stake in the company. And in that same year, he became the director of the CIA. And if you look at the legal situation with becoming, if you should ever become the head of the CIA, you're expected to place all of your holdings into what's called a blind trust. It has to be shown that you are not, there's no conflict of interest going on there between your role in the CIA and what you hold privately. And Casey did that with the exception of one part of his stock, which was his stock in capital cities. He didn't put it into blind trust. So we jump forward to March 18th, 85, and Capital Cities announces a $3.5 billion purchase of ABC. And that increased Casey's share to $7 million. But make of this what you will, if you want to call this coincidence or not. But at that precise point in time, the CIA actually challenged ABC's right to retain its broadcasting licenses just before, during the merger, basically. And that actually resulted in lowering the value of the stock, the price of ABC stock on the public market. And you do have to wonder what the timing of this, what prompted that sudden attack from the CIA. The official story is basically Casey's challenge came about because ABC News had reported, they aired this report claiming that the CIA had murdered this chap called Ron Rewald, who was a Honolulu swindler. But Rewald had actually claimed that his scams were being orchestrated by the CIA, and there was some sort of shaming going on there. Casey demanded that the Federal Communications Commission revoke ABC's station licenses. And in February, the CIA actually reduced its demands to penalties under fairness doctrine. But it is curious that, if you look at Casey, it's the first time ever that the CIA had sought such redress from the media in that public level. So we do have to ask the question, was William Casey being driven by his desire to protect his financial investments, or was there something more sinister going on? And if you look at William Casey, he was the chap that oversaw Operation Mockingbird for the CIA, which was an operation designed to give the CIA much greater control over the media. And he said of Operation Mockingbird once, "We will know a disinformation campaign is complete when everything the American public believes is false." So you really do, it just doesn't add up. There's something really, it stinks of a rat, it really does. So then, of course, we have to ask this question about the merger several years later between ABC, Capital Cities and Disney. And their documented connections to the CIA I've shown with some films, but it goes far deeper than that. 2013, T.D. Ullman publishes a controversial book called Finding Florida, The True History of the Sunshine State. And in it, backed up by much documentation as well, it's revealed that during the 1960s, Disney had actually conspired with the CIA to buy up cheap land in Florida for Disney World. And that would actually create a unique legal situation to place Disney outside the law, basically. They could create their own tax laws and things like that. And according to this Daily Mail Online article, the company took advice from former CIA agents and lawyers to engineer statutory grounds which still allowed Disney World to avoid taxation and environmental regulation. Walt Disney conspired with William Wild Bill Donovan, the so-called father of the CIA, to establish a state within a state where he could control the overall development of Disney World. Donovan, founding partner of New York law firm Donovan, Leisure, Newton and Irvine, whose attorneys included CIA Director William Casey, who I just spoke about, provided lawyers to help Disney distract attention away from its plans. So it all ties together. I'll move away from that a little bit, but it's still in this sort of espionage territory and that sort of thing, the kind of technology that's used. Disney's research labs, which describe themselves as an organisation designed to build Disney theme parks, resorts, cruise ships, and other entertainment venues. One portion of the research agenda covers related entertainment technologies, robots, mobile computing, sensing, and displays. The other addresses human-computer interaction, social psychology, and environmental science. And this is an organisation that's creating entertainment films, television programmes. Of course, we've got the theme parks and that, but social psychology, environmental science, it's a lot of power. Some little bits and pieces that they have been involved with, Disney using RFID tags to create powerless, low-cost interactive controllers. We have another one here. Disney smartwatch knows what you're touching and tells you what to do next. And this is old hat now. This is former military drones, basically, flying around the skies of Disney theme parks. They say they use it for security. I'm talking about technology now. And I'm going to read out, this is quite lengthy, but it certainly makes the point. I just want you to bear in mind as well, this is 2006, we're talking 11 years ago now, by Karen Harmel, entitled Walt Disney World, the Government's Tomorrowland. Walt Disney World is responsible for the nation's largest single commercial application of biometrics, said Jim Wayman, Director of National Biometric Test Centre at San Jose State University. The government was very aware of what Disney was doing, he said. Everybody's interested in a successful project. Industry insiders say Disney has expressed interest in an even more advanced form of biometric technology, automated face recognition. Okay. It's been touted as a way to pick criminals and terrorists out of a crowd. Right, okay. Minnesota-based Identix Inc. has contracts with the State Department, Department of Homeland Security, been in contact with Disney. Because it's an ongoing initiative, Identix is not at liberty to talk about it, said company spokesman Mayor Catan of the work with Disney on face recognition systems. Another company, California-based A4 Vision Inc., confirmed meeting with Disney officials in the past year to present its A4 facial recognition system to Disney. They were interested, said A4 Vision spokeswoman Susan Matic. A4 Vision is funded in part by the Department of Defense and InQtel, the CIA's venture capital firm for new technologies. Although Disney will not disclose who makes its fingerprint scanners, I will come to who really does in a minute, biometrics experts said that the new technology is likely provided by New Mexico-based Lumidyne Inc. Lumidyne has also received funding from the CIA as well as the National Security Agency and Department of Defense, according to founder and CEO Bob Harbour. The government has looked to Disney for advice on biometrics in the past. After 9/11, one Disney executive was part of a group convened by the Federal Aviation Administration and other federal agencies to help develop a plan for passenger protection and identity verification. And I've lost my place. Yeah, sorry. At airports using biometrics. The executive, Gordon Levin, also was part of a group asked by the National Institute of Standards of Technology, that ties into 9/11, I will touch back on that in a moment, and the National Security Agency to develop national standards for biometrics industry. Another former Disney employee, Bran Ferren, served on the advisory boards for State Intelligence Committee and offered his technological expertise to the NSA and DHS. So like I say, we're bearing in mind I put 10 years, but it's actually 11 now. This is just white world stuff. We're not even talking about the top secret black level stuff. And it's 10 or 11 years. What are Disney really involved with? I think I know, but yeah. So I mentioned about the body scanners, fingerprint, that sort of thing, actually developed for Disney theme parks by Los Alamos and Sandia Laboratories. And in the 1990s, early 1990s, there were several investigations into these things called CRADAs, which are cooperative research and development agreements between government agencies and seemingly private companies, so or non-government organisations as well, that sort of thing. One of these CRADAs, which was around about 1994, involved the US Department of Energy, specifically Sandia Laboratories. And they provided Disney with this thing called the Bridge. It was like a silicon circuit semiconductor device developed by Sandia for defence applications such as weapons detonation. I think Disney said that they use them for setting off firework displays. So, yeah. October 1996, there's this meeting at the Association of Research Libraries, and Thomas Garcia is the director of institutional development at Los Alamos. This is what he basically had to say. He laid out an agenda. And he said, of our headcount, 70 are energy department employees. Our workload at Los Alamos hasn't gone down. Testing weapons without being able to actually detonate them is a real challenge. We know that private industry performs over 70% of all research and development in the US. These agreements are meant to be a two-way street. Private companies win access to our brains and equipment, and we're put in touch with private sector breakthroughs. Under these agreements, we provide the operating cost of the particular project, while the private partner provides staff, equipment, and concepts. Under the CRADAs, we are looking at how our skills might be applicable to Walt Disney. We talk about energy. I mentioned about the Department of Energy there, and you will see that this is a key part of what Disney is all about. Disney was allowed, first film at the film studio at the time, allowed to film at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories in 1982 for the film Tron. Lawrence Livermore, for those of you who don't know, was founded in 1952. It's a research facility heavily but not exclusively funded by the Department of Energy. And the facility was responsible for designing the majority of America's nuclear warhead arsenal, nuclear weapons arsenal. They've actually also worked with every branch of the military-industrial complex on the likes of psychic warfare, psychic spying, that sort of thing, mind control for that matter, free energy technology development, and for that matter, the suppression of it as well. Which, like I say again, will tie into the subject of energy. But I will come back to that because I just briefly want to move into this idea for a moment of wholesome family values, what Disney portrays itself around the world, these standards of reputation, wholesome family values. And Disney films and television programs are generally considered to be appropriate for the whole family, especially young children. I don't believe they are. In fact, I know they're not, but that's, But we have these common themes that run through the production, apparent since the very early days of Disney. I'll just lay it out here a little bit. Characters finding themselves on physical and psychological journeys, usually lost, separated from their loved ones, perhaps trying to find their way home again. They're attempting to create a new life for themselves. The journey usually involves some kind of trauma. That's interesting in and of itself. A transformative experience, metamorphosis into a new kind of being, that sort of thing. Involves hardship, danger, peril, heartbreak. And the protagonist usually befriends all sorts of strange creatures along the way, usually non-human individuals or individual on its own. Often animals, but they've included robots, aliens, ghosts, figments of the imagination, you name it. And like I've right there, most people would argue that that is standard fare for a narrative. You go back to the early days of fairy tales and all that sort of thing. And you could make a good argument with that, but with Disney, it's a bit different. We've got this wholesome family values, and it is really, really strange. Disney, the way they come at it is just central characters. Orphaned, fostered, adopted, abandoned, or they have no family at all. They suffer the loss of one or both of their parents, and usually that is the part of the course. You watch these films, check them out. There are a lot of adopted, foster or step-parent roles in the Disney films. Now, that's got nothing to do with how you perceive a family unit, and that's not what I'm getting at here. The idea of family unit should be loving, nurturing, caring, being there. It doesn't matter if it's a step-parent or a foster parent, whatever. That is what it should all be about, is love and caring for other people, for your charges. But Disney do not portray those characters like this. We've got 4 examples here, and there are many, many more. They're often psychopathic, usually homicidal. They're trying to kill their charges, And, I do not believe that is wholesome family values. It sneaks through. People sit there and they don't recognise it. We'll give one example here. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937. 1937. This is 80 years ago. Begins with Snow White, jealous stepmother, queen, ordering a huntsman to take Snow White out into the woods and kill her. Further on, Snow White escapes and befriends various woodland creatures as well as 7 adult dwarfs. The queen creates a poison apple to put Snow White into what she calls a sleeping death. The queen cackles at one point about taking Snow White and burying her alive. Child inappropriate content in it, but there's also loads of other themes in the film as well. Themes of, esoteric occult, mind control, trauma-based mind control, that sort of thing. Very readily viewable in the film, recognisable. And as I put there, it's worth pointing out that when the first film was first released in England, it was actually passed as an A, which is more suitable for adult audiences. And picture houses forbade anybody under the age of 16 from seeing the film due to its scary content. And we put these films on in front of our little 3, well, I don't, obviously, many of you probably don't, but, people do put them in front of their 3, 4-year-olds, and maybe that, 80 years ago, consider maybe not now, we're desensitized to this kind of thing, but nevertheless, it's there. And some other examples as well. Pinocchio, the character Stromboli locks Pinocchio in a bird cage, and you've got mind control symbolism there of that alone, to prevent him from leaving, warning that if he grows too old, he's going to chop him into firewood. Bambi, we have blood in a Disney animated film as well. The mother shot, killed by the deer hunter while the son's looking for food. Alice in Wonderland, the Queen of Hearts, off with her head, orders Alice to be decapitated. These are children's films. So just a few examples, and it's continued to this day. And as I alluded there to this idea of trauma, trauma mind control that. We really do have to talk about people like Kathy O'Brien and her book, Transformation of America. Because in her book, she actually says, she was a former trauma-based mind control victim, programmed. And she said, during my Christmas vacation, 1974, my father flew us all to Disney World by route of Tampa, Florida. Ignorant of geography, it did not occur to me that Tampa was out of the way to Disney World until my father drove the rented van to the gates of MacDill Air Force Base. Military personnel met me there and escorted me into a top secret, high-tech mind control conditioning facility for behavioural modification programming. And she actually said that at that point in her life, so far, I'd only been to MacDill and Disney World for government military programming. And again, reinforced by Bryce Taylor, also known as Soon as Ford, in her book, Thanks for the Memories. She says, Walt Disney took me to an office, told me he was my real father. He said the Mickey Mouse Club was my real family, where I really belonged. Everyone was always telling me I belonged to a different family than my parents, and I didn't understand. It was all very confusing. Walt Disney seemed nice, but I wasn't with him for very long. He called another man in, and that man took me by the hand and led me away. This man was a very bad man. He really scared me. He took me into another room and gave me those Viewmaster box glasses to look into. He showed me pictures in them that were so scary that other parts of me had to come see them. This is like dissociative personalities programming, that sort of thing. It was too much for a little girl to see. Dead things, cut up bodies, dead cats skinned with big eyeballs and their tails cut off, people cut up, etc. This event involved several of my personalities. Just Mary Lewis, a researcher, has written about it as well in Awakening to the Realities of Mind Control. Certain themes have surfaced through the years, which this day continue to amaze me as I hear them over and over. The Disney parks, Disney movies, Disney characters, Disney songs have all been used in conjunction with the programming. My understanding of this is that using such a familiar and popular theme assures that the program will be triggered easily. To anyone who is a Disney fan and who is not, this is probably one of the hardest things to believe. However, sitting where I sit, hearing what I hear, and seeing what I see, I cannot refute this truth anymore. And Ron Patton in his book Project Monarch as well. Programming is updated periodically and reinforced through visual, auditory and written mediums. Some of the first programming themes include The Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland, both heavily saturated with occult symbolism. Many of the recent Disney movies and cartoons are used in a twofold manner, desensitizing the majority of the population using subliminals and neuro-linguistic programming, and deliberately constructing specific triggers and keys for base programming of highly impressionable monarch children. That's another form of mind control programming, monarch, allegedly. Cisco Wheeler and Fritz Springmeier in the book The Illuminati Formula used to create an undetectable total mind control slaves. Bit of a mouthful, that one. This is why Disney movies and other shows are so important to get to the programmers. They are the perfect hypnotic tool to get the child's mind to dissociate in the right direction. The programmers have been using movies since almost day one to help children learn the hypnotic scripts. So we do have to wonder about all this bizarre symbolism and themes that are in Disney's output, particularly in relation to mind control, trauma-based mind control. A lot of literature talking about how it's used as part of these specific programs that go on. But you do have to wonder about the effect that it's having just on the rest of us, the mass population of the world. Whenever we're in the presence of these things, we catch it, or even sitting there for longer, Is it like that sort of top-up programming, that mass effect, and how it's affecting our perceptions of reality as well. Which I'll come back to that. I just briefly want to touch on this idea of sexual symbolism, and I did put the disclaimer on there: if you're easily offended by this sort of imagery, shut your eyes and I'll tell you when to open them. It's not too bad, but you never know. So we'll just start very, very briefly with this one. Bearing in, like I say on there, you've got to bear in mind again, this is supposed to be child-friendly output, But we have male sexual organs embedded in the posters of the Little Mermaid film for Disney. There's loads of examples of this on the internet. For any of you not familiar with it, you can go out and have a look at it yourself. There's just a few examples, but it's endless, the amount of examples that are available on the internet to look at. And I should point out as well, there are actually other things embedded in the film itself. There's a scene where the priest is conducting a wedding ceremony and he seems to be having an erection as he's doing it as well, and then the Little Mermaid, so make of that what you will. Auntie Panty, Jessica Rabbit in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, for a few frames of film. An image of a bare-breasted woman in the background of a scene from the animated film The Rescuers. You can see it blown up a little bit more. Interestingly, somebody who came to a talk I did in Birmingham several months back said that she thought it looked like the lady actually was wearing a mask, or some sort of blindfold over as well, which kind of ties into the sort of MK stuff as well. It's a bit blurry, so but it perhaps does look like that. But nevertheless, that image shouldn't be there anyway. So this one, perhaps well known, the idea of the word sex being embedded in the sky in The Lion King. Actually, Disney animators for this film did come out and say, they noticed this, they acknowledged this, and they did say that it actually said SFX, as in special effects. But I think you can see, just, there, you can see the bottom of the E there, bottom of the E there. To me, it looks like sex, but, make of that what you will. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Another one from a Lion King poster. Would you see it without that? You know what I mean? And another possibly embedded sex word in the poster for Tangled as well. This goes across the board. It's just a few examples. But it isn't just the sexual imagery as well. We've got occult, secret society symbolism, directly placed in Disney's output, secret society symbolism. Many examples again. There is one example here from the Disney DuckTales episode Yuppie Duck, with an eye chart on the wall that says, "Ask about Illuminati." Make of that what you will. There's lots of perspectives on the whole Illuminati paradigm. But they're intentionally placing it there. But why? That's the big question. And I think I might have found an answer to that, because 2015, I'd already written a fair bit of material about Disney on my blog articles and in first edition of Science Fiction and then in Global Agenda, my book I wrote. And clearly this had been read by this lady. She contacted me, and she said she worked at the Disney company for quite a few years. She still works there now in a position of quite prominent authority. And she said that my instincts on the Disney subject were largely correct. But she began to tell me some stories, quite shocking, quite staggering stories actually. Some of her personal experiences working there, projects she'd been involved with. We built up a level of trust and respect for each other over a period of months. I didn't think it was unreasonable to ask her if she could prove her credentials, because if somebody contacts you and tells you I did this, I did that, you would want to know. If she said no, that would be fine. It wouldn't matter to me. But, I just wanted to know. And she did. She was a bit reluctant at first, but she did provide me with substantial evidential material, proved that she was exactly who she says she was. You can never be 100% sure with these things, but I am 99.9% sure that she is on the level and she is who she says she is. She provided work credentials, a position and a history, and some degree the kind of things that she'd been involved with. Because of the sensitive nature of her experiences and whether we're still working there, and the project she works on, anything that I touch upon that could potentially identify her. So I am on a bound not to reveal that for the moment until she decides to fully disclose herself. So unfortunately, you will, I don't want you to take my word for it, but it is unfortunately that situation. I don't expect anybody to ever just take what I say at face value, to go away and research it for yourself. Unfortunately, this is one of those times where I can't do that, but, But anyway, earlier this year I told her I was going to be talking about Disney. I asked her if I could ask her a few questions, and she would provide me with answers that I would read out to people come to my talks and that sort of thing. And it's just a few generic questions. But so we talked about embedded symbolism, that sort of thing in Disney. And I asked the question straight out. Do you know if these subliminal themes and images are intentionally inserted in Disney? Because the argument sometimes is that these people that work on these projects are just putting them in for a bit of fun. There's nothing untoward with it. It's just bored, mucking about, whatever. They know people look for them, and that's kind of confirmed, but there's more to it. So I asked her why, obviously, as well. And this is what she said. Yeah, they are. It's common knowledge in the company. Some are put in just for kicks, but more are dictated from higher up. There's actually a cover within a cover. At some levels, Disney employees know that the company have been tapping the conspiracy folk as a new audience demographic. It's true that there are folks who hate watching Disney films, but they still watch and pore over the material to look for subliminals and hidden stuff. I do. So maybe I am their demographic. You know, I do it for research purposes, not to watch it, but you know. So she continues. So they become part of the audience by default. It sells more DVDs and theatre tickets, and as a result, the imagery is put in to cater for them. But that's only a very small part of the reason why it's done. There are high-up suits in the company who have some way-out beliefs, and they want it seen and reflected in the products. There are rituals that go on all the time. People do talk about them, but I've never seen one personally. I know it goes on. There are a lot of people working at Disney who are into the occult, arcane mystery stuff and mythology. It's actually something that they look for when screening new employees to work as Imagineers, you know, writers, directors, CG animators, those sorts of jobs. Ritualistic techniques and themes concentrates and directs the energy to and from the viewer. The company is obsessed with that. And that's actually true, because I've got one example here from documentation. Mark Renault, the President of Social Sciences and Humanitarian Research Council of Canada, this document, he's talking about the computer games industry. And he said, people in the software game industry tell me there is a great demand for humanities graduates in the high-tech industry where a master of myth and literary archetype is fundamental for the inventing of games that sell. This is just computer games we're talking about here. But naturally, it would follow that it would be the same for television, films, music industry for that matter as well. So I asked my Disney contact another question. I said, is there any evidence of Disney's involvement with mind control research and experimentation, particularly those military CIA projects such as MKUltra? And she said, the problem with the term mind control, it's too general and non-specific. Does Disney engage in psychological programming? Totally. Look at those poor saps who look for work at Disney World and other resorts. The rules and mantras they are drilled with before they can work there. Total brainwashing. It's not quite so bad at corporate levels of Disney, but there are still plenty of real batshit crazy people on the payroll who buy the whole Disney ethos. Some started out that way, others were conditioned over a period of time. It doesn't work with everybody though, and I would say it doesn't work with my contact. The sort of mind control you are referring to does get talked about very quietly, but if you get heard talking about it, you're in for a world of hurt. It's like it's bad for the company image, and I know why. From personal experience, I have learned the hard way that Disney's numero uno reason for existing is to engage in worldview warfare, perception management, psychological control, using all types of methods and technology, even classified or semi-classified at times. And that's backed up by my contact, some of the stuff that she's worked on. They use every means they have to manipulate everybody, building fake realities, taking them apart again, building new ones, on and on it goes. It's more than a corporate marketing strategy. It's a blanket policy that comes from a very high level. Somebody or something outside Disney calls the shots. I used to think it was just government through non-government organisations or military-industrial complex, military-industrial. Even though I can prove that non-government organisations and the military are part of it, it looks like it comes from a much more external place. The hidden hand, you know, that part is much harder to prove, though. So I asked her about the overall agenda, basically, for Disney. Did she have any specific insight into that she could share with me? And she has over time. I understood where she was being cryptic with this, first of all. But she said, basically, Disney is obsessed with energy and consciousness. That's what it's all about. And I asked her if there was a paper trail, something we could look at to find their goals and agendas and that. And at that point, again, strangely, cryptically, she said that I should look at people like JJ Abrams. She specifically mentioned the television program Lost, actually, as well, but JJ Abrams and his creative team that work alongside him. So we have this group of individuals here, affiliated with JJ Abrams, pictured in the middle. This group, I termed the phrase the JJ Brigade. It seems to have taken on a little bit, so I'll take credit for that one. But the core group consists of these 6 individuals. They are pictured from left to right. Carlton Coos, Robert Orsi, Brian Burke, pictured lying down. Obviously, we've got JJ Abrams in the middle. Damon Lindelof and Alex Kurtzman. And they all, it seems as though now they all, I've been able to document that they all pretty much got their breaks working at Disney. We'll start with the man himself, JJ Abrams. His first script that he sold, a movie script, was to Disney called Taking Care of Business, purchased by Touchstone actually. He went on, became quite prominent, became one of 9 writers on the film Armageddon, which, as I mentioned earlier, was DoD NASA supported. 1998, he set up the company Bad Robot Productions at Touchstone. And he stayed with them for a number of years. I think it was about 8 years, something like that. 2006, he moved the company over to Paramount Pictures and Warner Brothers. But there is still overlap with Disney even now, even though they've moved away from ABC. And his fellow brigade member, Brian Burke, serves as the executive vice president of Bad Robot. And Bad Robot started with television production, but it did eventually expand into films. And as many of you may know, that their films are amongst the highest grossing movies that are being produced by Hollywood today. I'll come to a couple of examples in a moment. We'll start with how it all started with Bad Robot. This was their first big hit, the television show Alias, co-created by JJ Abrams and the CIA's entertainment industry liaison officer, Chase Brandon. Brandon also assisted JJ Abrams on the 2006 movie Mission Impossible 3. CIA officially supported Alias production and the subsequent Mission Impossible films. And we also have the fact that in August 2003, the lead actress in the show, Jennifer Garner, played Sydney Bristow, the character Sydney Bristow, was enlisted by the CIA to star in recruitment films for the CIA that were shown at college fairs, campuses and things like that. So, yeah. And they actually quoted on their website, Jennifer and the character of Sydney Bristow both reflect a lot of the qualities we look for in new career field officers. People will argue that this was a choice on Jennifer Garner's part, but she was still very much involved with the show at the time. She would have needed clearance. She was working for ABC as well, so she would have needed the approval from them to do it. And of course, like I say there, and it's documented that the CIA were involved with the show in any case, so. The next big hit for them was the television series Lost, as I mentioned before. I do cover this an awful lot when I have more time to talk about this in talks, and I've written extensively about it in my books and articles and that. But basically, just in a nutshell, Lost is a really, really bizarre piece of work as a television show, really. It's got Easter egg themes in it, secret society myth themes, masonry, Saturn worship, child abuse and abduction, trauma-based mind control, conspiracies, cover-ups, some things that overlap with 9/11 to do with planes and all that kind of stuff as well. So it really, really, they've took their influence all over the shop, they really have. But one of the central themes in the show is this idea of energy and consciousness, because the island in the show is littered with these pockets of electromagnetic energy that affect the characters, cause them to become ill, cause them to get well, have psychic experience, out-of-body experiences, they see ghosts and interdimensional stuff going on, portal creation, all that. And they, in the story, it's basically all explained on these electromagnetic anomalies on the island. So we have energy and consciousness in tandem with each other, one affecting the other and vice versa. So we stay on this subject of energy because it is a theme that continues throughout JJ Abrams' work. We have another television show. This was not produced by Disney, but it was produced by JJ Abrams and the company Bad Robot, called Revolution television series. Substantial support from the United Nations by the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in conjunction with the Department of Energy, so energy again. Also DoD involvement in the show, and the core story arc of the television series Revolution is about energy and consciousness. It's actually about what would happen if all the electricity went off around the world and how human evolution would take place after that, the next step. So it's energy and consciousness again. Same theme. Just diversifying a little bit for a moment, just to sort of give you another example of the CIA. We have the television show Persons of Interest. Again, not Disney, but, it's the same theme. CIA involvement, and also had Valerie Plame, the former CIA operative, involved, and at least 2 military technical advisors on the show as well. Another example here, again, it's not Disney, but you can see the pattern. This is the type of shows that they love to make. They're all involved with it. Westworld, very, very popular show. I put here that unofficially, but it has been confirmed officially that the DoD have been involved. They're very much involved with the second season of the show that's just been finished now. So, and they've got some additional consultancy from DARPA as well, so the Department of Advanced Research Projects Agency as well. So it's that kind of thing. And as I've said before when I've done these talks, the story arc of Westworld is basically about transhumanism. But it's also about trauma-based mind control of these slaves in violently abused for the sexual urges of these elite types that come to this park, which is basically a Disney park, whichever way you look at it, And the themes of energy and consciousness are very much there. This idea, it's all AI consciousness actually in this regard. Move to the movies, and a good example here, 2013. JJ Abrams' Star Trek Into Darkness. Some of you may know that I've covered Star Trek many, many times in the last several years, my research, written a huge amount of material on it. But Star Trek Into Darkness is thanked in the end credits. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, operated by Lawrence Livermore National Security LLC, for the US Department of Energy, again, National Nuclear Security Administration. We know that they were involved. We know the Department of Energy was involved in the film. We know they were consulted, but we don't know why. It's never been explained what their role was in this film. But I think I know the answer, because anybody who watches this film will recognize instantly that Star Trek Into Darkness is a blitz of propaganda for the official version of the events of 9/11. The imagery in the film very much so as well as the narrative. And in that regard, we really do have to consider this book. It's the linchpin of it all. Again, it is all about energy and consciousness for that matter as well. Where did the towers go? Dr. Judy Wood. Because we're right back into that subject of energy again. The overlap of 9/11 and the themes in the film as well. So we move on to another one here. 2012, the Walt Disney Company gets Lucasfilm. They buy Lucasfilm for $4.05 billion, another biggie deal for them. I think it also got them the Indiana Jones franchise as well as part of that. But as soon as it was announced, a new Star Wars film, surprise, surprise, who gets the directorship of it? Who helms the film? JJ Abrams. And the reason why I mention that is director, producer, co-writer on the film. The reason why I mention that is because the core concept at the center of Star Wars, this idea of the Force, is energy and consciousness. Again, it's the same thing. So, that's the question I ask. Is that why JJ Abrams was specifically chosen right from the get-go for that film? And it's also making me wonder now why, even though he wasn't going to be directing another Star Wars film, he's actually been brought back now to direct episode 9 of the series, the final part. Is that just a coincidence? I don't think it is, but make of that what you will. With regard to Star Wars, George Lucas himself actually went on television, did an interview with Charlie Rose in December 2015, and he said something very, very strange about Disney. Bearing in mind he sold Disney, the Star Wars franchise, Lucasfilm, to Disney. This is what he had to say.
They weren't that keen to have me involved anyway, but at the same time I said, I'm not going to, if I get in there, I'm just going to cause trouble, because they're not going to do what I want them to do, so, and I don't have the control to do that anymore, and all I would do is muck everything up. So I said, okay, I will go my way and I'll let them go their way. And it really does come down to a simple rule of life, which is when you break up with somebody, the first rule is no phone calls. The second rule, you don't go over to their house and drive by to see what they're doing. Yes. The third one is you don't show up at their coffee shop or the things like you're going to run it. You just say, no, gone, history, I'm moving forward. Because every time you do, and we all learn this from experience, every time you do something like that, you're opening the wound again. And it just makes it harder for you. You have to put it behind you, and it's a very, very, very hard thing to do. But you have to just cut it off and say, okay, end the ball game. I got to move on. And everything in your body says, don't, you can't. And these are my kids. So
all those Star Wars films.
All the Star Wars films.
They were your kids.
Yeah, well, they are. Like, I loved them. I created them. I'm very intimately involved in them, and obviously to
and
sell
you
them
sold
off,
them.
I sold them to the white slavers that take these things and
okay, but
I sold them to the white slavers that take these things and
okay, but I mean,
and the subject goes off somewhere else and he doesn't come back to it again. And then a week later, he puts out a statement. Rarely ever does this, George Lucas. He says, I misspoke and used a very inappropriate analogy. He starts waxing lyrical about JJ Abrams, the new Star Wars franchise, Disney, how wonderful it is and how it's going to be. What prompted that? Was he trying to say something? Somebody shut him up? Who knows? And people have asked me, what did he mean by white slavers? I don't know. I mean, it's certainly something derogatory. It's not a positive thing. And if you think about this idea that if Disney really is obsessed with controlling mass human energy and consciousness, the term slavery is appropriate. It's more apt than ever. You are enslaving human consciousness via the media, by the process of what they're doing. So before I finish, just a few final thoughts to tie up this idea of consciousness and energy with Disney. There's a few points I've just laid out here. Basically, electrostatics and magnetism, capacitance and electrical currents, these forces exist and they do play a role in defining our reality. Science knows that. And on a more esoteric level, we know that as well. Symbols, geometry, numbers, etc., they have a measurable force on energy fields. The media largely uses these representations to communicate with the viewer and listener of the media. Light and sound can reprogram DNA. We know that as well. Technology and techniques exist that can use the audio and visual of films and televisions to shows to transmit and generate negative energy. I know that to be the case now. Understanding energy creates the ability to manipulate consciousness and our reality. When the media generates negative energy from emotional reactions like fear, isolation, confusion, mistrust, uncertainty, anger, jealousy, hatred, the list goes on, the mass viewers in turn feed negativity back into the system. We need to break the cycle. It's a perpetual cycle of negativity. Feeds us, social engineering through the media. The masses get lost in this fog of negative energy. They find it hard to recognize their true nature and their true reality and their true consciousness as well, their true nature of being. And it's that realization as true energetic conscious beings. It's the one thing that I know the ruling elite of the world do not want us to realize. They do not want us to understand it, because when we understand that, their control over us is broken. It's gone, and we're free. And that's the reason why the media uses the elite use the media, basically. It's their control tool of choice. It distracts us, it manipulates us away from that realization. So this is the best bit of advice. Sorry, I'm jumping a slide here, yeah. So we talk about this idea of embedded themes, NLP, social engineering. This is the question I've been asking myself a lot just lately. This idea, is there now a means to transmit through the media energy that substantially reshapes our perceptions? I'm not just talking about social engineering, I'm talking about something that is tangibly affecting our perceptions of reality. What is real, what is not. And some media whistleblowers, and I know this from my contact, claim that technology is now in existence, it's been tested, and it's actually being used unwittingly on the public right now. And then find a little quote here from Jean Baudrillard, 1996, Perfect Crime. This is the story of a crime of the murder of reality and the extermination of illusion. The vital illusion, the radical illusion of the world. The real does not disappear into illusion. It is illusion that disappears into integral reality. It is an unconditional realization of the world by the actualization of all data. The transformation of all our acts and all events into pure information. In short, the final solution, the resolution of the world ahead of time by the cloning of reality and the extermination of the real by its double. And that's what I believe the media is doing right now. How do we escape it? Well, that's one obvious way of doing it. It's pretty straightforward. We don't give it our attention. We don't give it our time. And if we have to, I do for research purposes. I really do not watch television at all anymore. I use it as a research tool when I have to, absolutely have to. And I have to bear in mind how easy it is to get sucked right back into it again. It's so easy. You get lost in a good narrative, something like that. You really have to be all the time on your guard, aware of what it is that's going on, what's being portrayed, what's being conveyed, what it's doing. And that's just on a superficial level. If there is something really profoundly energetic going on, how do you control that? We can't give it our attention if that's the case. It needs to be gone. In the current shape it is anyway. Yeah, and with that, I just want to say thank you so much for coming today, and please enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you for coming to listen to me talk. If you want to check out my work, there's the Truth Seeker's Guide, Blogspot, and my books. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Carl James, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Carl.